Mrs. Tittlemouse began to pull out the mouse. 3 or 4 other bees put their heads out and buzzed fiercely. "I am not in the habit of letting lodgings. This is an intrusion," said Mrs. Tittlemouse. "I will have them turned out." Buzz, buzz, buzz. "I wonder who would help me." Wheeze, wheeze, wheeze. "I will not have Mr. Jackson. He never wipes his feet." Mrs. Tittlemouse decided to leave the bees till after dinner. When she got back to the parlour, she heard someone coughing in a fat voice, and there sat Mr. Jackson himself. He was sitting all over a small rocking chair, twiddling his thumbs and smiling, with his feet on the fender. He lived in a drain below the hedge, in a very dirty wet ditch. "How do you do, Mr. Jackson?" "Dearie me, you have got very wet." Thank you, Mrs. Tittlemouse. "I'll sit a while and dry myself," said Mr. Jackson. He sat and smiled, and the water dripped off his coat-tails. Mrs. Tittlemouse went round with a mop. He sat such a while that he had to be asked if he would take some dinner. First, she offered him cherry stones. Thank you, Mrs. Tittlemouse. No teeth, no teeth, no teeth," said Mr. Jackson. He opened his mouth most unnecessarily wide. He certainly had not a tooth in his head. Then she offered him thistledown seed. "Tiddly, widdly, widdly, puff, puff, puff," said Mr. Jackson. He blew the thistledown all over the room. Thank you, Mrs. Tittlemouse. Now, what I really should like would be a little dish of honey." "I am afraid I have not got any, Mr. Jackson," said Mrs. Tittlemouse. "Tiddly, widdly, widdly, Mrs. Tittlemouse," said the smiling Mr. Jackson. "I can smell it. That is why I came to call." Mr. Jackson rose ponderously from the table and began to look into the cupboards. Mrs. Tittlemouse followed him with a dishcloth to wipe his large wet footmarks off the parlour floor. When he had convinced himself that there was no honey in the cupboards, he began to walk down the passage. Indeed, you will stick fast, Mr. Jackson. Tiddly, widdly, widdly, Mrs. Tittlemouse."